Our final session today is a chance for us to highlight some of what we've heard today, some of the takeaways, if you like. The session is called, What Have We Learned? And I'd like to ask Clint Mallman, Bridget Anderson, and Karen Kawicka, all from our Oversight Committee, to join me here on stage. These colleagues of mine from the Oversight Committee of SOS have been so important to developing this program and moving it forward to where we are today. And we've had, well, we've met every 2 weeks, formally, every 2 weeks. And lots of conversations and discussions between those meetings, of course. And we've had some interesting conversations. I wouldn't say debates necessarily, but we don't always end up on the same page. But we realize that there's a solution to the problems that are trying to be addressed. That when we look around, we hear about all the problems that we have talked about today. There isn't one where there isn't a solution somewhere. And we heard it today that what's required is the political will to actually implement those solutions. Decisions have to be made around priorities. Terry, you and your colleagues have to make decisions around those priorities. Other political leaders at different levels have the responsibility of doing the same. It's a tough job. It's a tough job. But when it comes to public safety, it's so important to all of us that we feel safe in our neighborhoods and our families safe in our neighborhoods, that we have to push these issues up the priority ladder. And that's one of the reasons that SOS, I think, had the success that it has had in the last year in generating interest. People believe that's the case, that we have to solve these problems. So we decided that our final panel would talk about what have we heard today, what actions will be taken in the future, and what did we really learn. So I wanted to start off by saying this, that I think that SOS should go away. We've taped this whole thing. We need to assess it. We need to think about it. And we need to produce a paper, like a white paper, that we can send to everybody here in the room who's been here today, that lays out what it is we think we heard and suggested recommendations to government. We won't get it 100% right, but there's an idea that we might be able to do that we can also send to government and start that conversation. And so that, you know, I'm just so proud of the fact that we have people from business, from community, from the interior, from the north, from the south, from all over BC. And surely we can bring those ideas together and use that as incentive to get some things done. So I'm going to start with Bridget. Bridget is so experienced at doing these things, believe me. I know that she also has a very strong opinion.
Yes, I do. I don't think I was ever accused of being quiet on things, even as a child. Nice to see all of you and to see so many different faces. I think when I sit back and reflect about today, I think about what I've heard Premier Eby say, and he said it privately and he said it publicly, that he is doing a reset, and that, in his words, he had a near-death experience. So when I think about that, I think about public safety as an economic issue. It is an issue that faces many of our small and medium businesses, the majority of which make up our 5,000 plus members. And so when we think about public safety and crime as a community issue, it is an economic issue. It brings incredible challenges for small and medium businesses. Some of them I'm seeing around the room today. So this is a window of opportunity. You know, we're looking at a very unique time in the world right now. We're facing incredible threats from south of the border. There is chaos in Ottawa. And so we have an opportunity in British Columbia to get our stuff together. And so we should be doing it. We should be leveraging every single opportunity that we have. And so when you're talking about going away and putting a paper together, that is the data that's needed. I think we have to help the government see solutions and help build the business case for solutions. I worry a little bit about the data. I read in BIV this week about crime going down, and I think what's really important to note is that it's reported crime that is going down, and some police officers may not feel the same as me about that. But I know from our members that crime is not going down. The break-ins are continuing in their stores. And I did note in that data that assaults are going up in certain areas around the city. So I think we have to be very careful about the picture that we're painting that is accurate to reflect what's happening with all of you, and then help the government find solutions. And I think Marshall made a really good point on who's in charge. You know, I think that there has been such a dispersal of responsibilities and services throughout, when I look just even in the downtown east side, but it's true of all of British Columbia. We need to galvanize and we need to coalesce some of these services and find a body to be responsible and accountable for some of the change. So I know that's the work that I want to continue to do with the coalition. And Clint, you have done a remarkable job. Jess, a remarkable job. And kudos to you for bringing such a diverse group together. I mean, that's where I think when I put my advocacy and communications hat on, that's the next steps for us is let's put together a really strong message with some very strong proof points, build the business case and show the solutions and continue to communicate it on many and every platform we can in any communications that we have with any level of government, particularly the BC government.
Good. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, again, for giving up such a large part of your day to drive change. You know, I'll just take a little sidebar for a sec. You know, I've been asked many times, especially today with a number of reporters, why is a company like London Drugs or myself got involved, because I certainly have several other full-time jobs. I didn't need another one. You know, and if we can save just one of our employees, and I mean our employees in retail or in the service industry, from a violent incident with long-term psychological harm from that, if we can have just one more small business survive an already challenging environment to keep our communities thriving, if we can see someone reach their potential that through circumstances that are difficult, they're not able to do that right now, boy, it's all been worth it. Just one. And that's what community is all about. As we heard Sam talk a lot about that. You know, communities evolve and they change, and sometimes they face challenges like we are today. In my world, we don't solve problems by making them more complex. And it's been my observation that over time, governments are really good at taking simple problems and making them really complex. And what happens with that, you give people excuses not to act. So our job collectively is to take a very complex problem that we've heard about today and simplify it into steps, into areas that we identify we can control. Because when we can control certain aspects of a problem, we can change it. Problems are rarely linear. Problems are rarely we solve one thing and it solves the whole thing. I've jotted down about 15 different opportunities that are very actionable. Everything from increasing the spaces at the Justice Institute to learning about the 15 different Indigenous justice model systems coming from our Indigenous wisdom, right through to who's in charge. I thought that was one that I triple underlined. There's got to be someone that's a decision maker. We certainly also need measurements, as has been talked about today, whether that be on housing, whether that be on some of these changes, because through that we can hold those that we elect to represent our community. Are they making the change? And more importantly, we have to support them, knowing full well that there's going to be failure from time to time, but we need to measure that. So failure isn't my opinion. It's measured by numbers that we can agree on. So we have independent information as opposed to a political view of how to solve the problem. I think I love to hear things like prevention. And that's what I mean, that problems aren't linear. We can solve and make action now. We can start now to make these small changes. But we also have to think of the next generation. And that Icelandic model that was brought up today is really fascinating to me because it was not only a model that appeared to have worked, but it was measurable so they knew that it could work. And I think that there are some world lessons. You know, it's been my experience is my job causes me to travel around the world. I've never seen ghettoization work in any problem. So we've seen and we heard Sam talk about the Switzerland model with 80 different rooms in 80 different buildings. And that certainly was my experience in looking at Belgium as a model. So I'm really encouraged here today. And I think that it's a heavy topic, that it's really easy to go, wow, this is overwhelming, and we heard a lot of complexity. Don't give in to it. Give in to the positive, that you as an individual, you as you're representing your organization, us as SOS, to hold our politicians accountable by simplifying the issues that they can take action on, and then we measure it. We put the goals in front of them. So when it comes to the next election or the next appointment, we can congratulate them where they deserve it, regardless of political stripe. I do want to emphasize one thing, is that when we've asked politicians, and it was said today, that there's bold action required. And we can characterize that in whichever way we want, what's bold and what's not. But when we've asked something of someone, and they've made change, we've got to rally behind it. We've got to park the partisan politics. And those that have made bold change, regardless of political stripe, regardless of which level of government, we've got to support that. Otherwise, we perpetuate the old system, which there's clear evidence hasn't worked. So that's what my opinion is right now.
Karen has been making notes on our behalf through all the various panels, and I'm really interested in hearing from a community perspective, what have you learned today? What have we heard?
Well, I feel like a first-year student amongst all the enthusiasm and expertise and knowledge. And it is relatable to the things that we feel and experience in community. The word that I've heard used across all of the panels today is prevention. And in community, that is one of the questions we ask ourselves all the time. Why can't this be prevented? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? So having that ring through all of the panels was really helpful, because it's not a question we have, it's a fact that everybody's widely understanding. It's interesting also to hear words like intersect used in this context, because it's true. It seems like from a community perspective, all of the agencies and the problems and the powers that be are not communicating with each other. And having that improvement, I think, will make a difference. It's also very hopeful. It's hopeful because a lot of times these problems are just perpetuating, and it feels as though it's an exercise in futility. But this is hopeful. There are solutions out there, and there are people that are very passionate about bringing those solutions to our community. And again, hopeful that we're going to see some of them implemented.
Thanks, Karen.
We heard a lot today about alignment between healthcare and justice, the justice system. And I think somebody called it the marriage between the two. And I think there's really something to that there needs to be better alignment between those two segments of governance. And that's got to be a priority going forward. We've got to break down some of those silos. Bridget?
Maybe one of the ways I think that we can think about this is, again, talking about it in economic terms. So we know that the majority of job creation growth has been in the public sector over the last 5 or so years. And so when we look where a lot of those jobs are, a lot of them are in the healthcare sector. And I think, to your point, Clint, that it becomes very complex when you add more and more layers of administration to a system. And so I would say to the provincial government, and Terry, I'm looking at you because you're one of the representatives here, is that's a good message to take back as the government is looking at the fiscal situation they are in and thinking about the fiscal prudence that's required. You know, how can we make the system simpler so that it can align with the justice system? The justice system is a little more complicated because we're talking about two levels of government that are required here and some alignment there. And that's very challenging at a time where there is some significant challenges in leadership at the federal level for the next few months. And I would also say that we should be looking at models in other jurisdictions. We don't need to recreate the wheel. We've heard today lots of other examples of countries in Europe that are doing this well. So let's look to them and learn what we can and put those in place. We don't need to always be recreating things from scratch. We can actually take from lessons learned in other jurisdictions, whether it's Switzerland or Portugal or a number of other countries that have been mentioned today.
Clint, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add two things. One, I have a belief that most systems over time acquire enough funding, but they become inefficient over time for lots of different reasons. And I do think we have to have a relook specifically at the interplay between justice and healthcare, because I suspect that what we'll find is that there's unintended barriers that have got in the way of doing things. Let me give you an anecdotal personal story that illustrates that. My wife is a very long time, 38-year plus ER trauma nurse at Royal Columbian Hospital, one of the busiest in all of Canada, and gets some of the most complex cases. She's been assaulted at work. One of my best friends is an RCMP officer. He said to my wife, I would never attend Royal Columbian ER without my service weapon. Wow. That's how violent it can get. My daughter is an ICU nurse at the same hospital, and she's been sadly violently physically assaulted by a mental health patient. So we have police in the same building. We have experts in the same building. We have a psychiatric care unit at one of the largest hospitals in Canada. And how does that, when we see this, systems that are incompatible to working with each other, that person can't get care, because that same person that my wife triaged or dealt with a trauma from attempted suicide or whatever it was, is back in later that night because they were released and couldn't be kept under the Mental Health Act because the doctors couldn't interpret the Mental Health Act for fear of retribution from our justice system. So I only use that as an illustration of a broken system. And again, when we look at complex problems, our job is, to look at it as a system-wide solution, a system thinking of where are those barriers that are getting in the way that prevented all of that waste from happening and truly care for a person in the system. And I also want to point out, and I'd be remiss if I didn't do it, and I'm relying on Dr. Julian Summers' work in the studies here, is that I believe his numbers said that just shy of all 50% of the crime in this one particular study, it happened to be in Vancouver, was committed by criminals. They didn't have mental health and addiction. And so this isn't solely a solution of mental health, addiction, and housing. We have to remember that there are two distinct worlds that have to be looked at, and you can't use the same tools to solve both worlds. And therefore, we have to think of those things through, that one size doesn't fit all, as we've heard today.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, one of the other things that stuck out for me was the commonality in agreement about secure involuntary care. And personally, I value the importance of that when I have loved ones suffering from mental illness. And it, regardless of the place that our panelists were coming from, whether it was policing or mental health and addictions, or even the justice system, everybody was in agreement that there is a place for that. And I'm hopeful that we're going to have more of that because of the significant need.
Yeah. One of the other topics that was mentioned in just about every panel was the concept of a full continuum of care. And those on the oversight committee have heard me talk about that before. It's For me, Clint, you just said that stats say that about 50% of the crime and violence that we're talking about is as a result of people with addictions and mental health. And if you could deal with that, 50% of the problem goes away. So if people can't get access to care, we're not going to fix the problem. So when you talk to government, they'll tell you that, well, we're doing that. We're doing that. We believe in having access to detox, access to treatment, access to long-term recovery. And the response that I have to that is, well, where and when? Because we don't have immediate detox. I keep asking the question, why don't we have detox in every hospital in Vancouver or every hospital in BC? Now, I can hear administrators screaming already, but you got to start somewhere. And I think for addictions, detox is that first immediate requirement. And then recovery, treatment and recovery, you can have on a regional basis. And we've heard again today about redfish. And everybody holds redfish up as this new advanced model of how you deal with addictions, mental health. Well, how come there's only one redfish? And if there's going to be more, Premier Eby, tell me where, and then tell me when. Because we've identified the problem. We know where the people are who need this treatment. Why aren't we planning now for establishing that? And again, it goes back to priorities and making government decisions, and they're not easy. But we need to have that plan. So a continuum of care, that concept, building that out, I think is fundamental. Fundamental.
You know, if I may, I'll add on to it. One of the things that I look from any level of government is, again, system thinking. How broadly are they thinking? Or are they only myopic to the problem in front of them? And it's a really simple thing to get drawn into that from a human nature perspective. But when I hear announcements, for example, before the election, we need more skilled trades. And then we hear, as an example today, we have expert panelists saying that 90 days treatment, which we have in British Columbia, isn't effective. It needs to be at least, we heard that it was 10 to at least 18 months that effective treatment can really take place and allow that person. And detox isn't available to everyone. We've also heard a lot of other issues where they access and things like that. For me, I start stitching together these problems going, we have a large group of society that isn't meeting their own potential. And we heard large statistics that a good percentage of people with mental health and addiction problems can be treated and have successful lives. But we're not providing that continuum of care. We don't have a seamless opportunity for someone to seek treatment when they, or seek detox when they need it, that seamlessly goes into a supportive environment where they need it, for the length of treatment they need it, with the professional and common support that they need, surrounded by a loving community. We're not hearing very much about reskilling those people that have probably been out of the workforce for a period of time. Any employer in the room today knows that they have a human rights obligation to support an employee through that. So that's already in place to be able to do that. And reskill them to the areas so we give them this wonderful opportunity for success and stop ghettoizing them. Like, to me, I appreciate it's significantly more complex than what I've just described. But that's the true continuum. A continuum isn't just part of it. It is all the way to success. And build in systems that know that the experts tell us that there's a high chance of someone having an issue again. And understanding as a society, that's okay. We're going to help them pick up and be successful. I just look at this whole thing as such a terrible waste of human capacity and human potential at the end of the day, along with my other worry, which is when 68% of British Columbians have lost faith in the justice system, it's really, I have no doubt that's part of some of the issues today is people give up. They don't believe it. And when people start giving up, that's when society starts to tear apart, and no level of continuum is going to help with that.
That's why it's so urgent that we act today. Bridget.
Just another perspective. I totally agree with everything you said, Clint, but I'm thinking about it from, again, a business perspective, and lots of business leaders in the room. You all set targets. I'm sure you set sales targets and revenue targets and all kinds of growth targets. So we should be asking and calling on the government to set targets. I saw this week, I think it was this week, there was an announcement about some new beds are being placed somewhere. And I think the number might have been 10 or 15. I can't remember because the number got lost on me. But I didn't know what that was in relation to. So I think more transparency. Is it 10 beds out of the goal of 100? Where's the sort of the dashboard or the ticker? If the government is saying it's going to put in 100 beds across the province, then they've done 10 here. Well, then they've got 90 more to go. And I think that's one thing, having worked in government many years ago, there's a lot of announcements that get retread. And so were these new beds? And was this part, how did that fit into the overall announcements that we've heard from government over many months? So I would say that that's part of it, because it's hard to have any insight into what the system is doing if we can't actually see maybe a dashboard or some sort of ticker tape on accomplishments. And so I think that's a big piece of it, that transparency and accountability.
Couldn't agree more, Bridget. In fact, after the last provincial election, the government called us and we met, Clint and I met with Premier Eby and 3 cabinet ministers and staff, and had a good conversation, initial conversation, so no particular actions to report on. But we did say that we wanted to celebrate their success with them. We wanted to celebrate results, not announcements. And we'd be willing to celebrate results, but it was really difficult to measure results when there are no KPIs. There's no key performance indicators to measure many of their programs. And the Premier actually, I guess I'm talking out of school, but we're here. We won't tell anybody. The Premier actually said, well, we'll work with you on that. We'll work with you on developing KPIs. I thought, okay, well, that's a start. That's a start. Now, we haven't gone down that road yet, but to be able to have actionable items that you can measure the success is absolutely necessary today. Karen, you had something.
Yeah, we were talking about the full continuum of care, and I appreciate the perspective that Clinton and Bridget expanded on. Yeah, but from a community perspective, there isn't any intervention points, for a family or for a community to initiate people into care. And that was one thing that Marshall talked about that was a revelation to me, because it seems that all of those people are shut out from initiating someone into care unless it's private care. Those situations don't always work out. But, to have a community safety officer or a bylaws officer or an outreach worker or a family member or an employer initiate someone into getting a full continuum of care, that empowers people to help one another, and it encourages people to actually seek help because they are supported by everybody they interact with in the community.
Look, we've had a long day. We've had a good day, I think. We've heard lots, and I think that the forum has delivered everything we thought that it would. It's our job now to summarize everything that we think we've learned and develop that paper, that strategy, I think, and get it out to everyone here. But we are time to wrap, and I want to say to everyone here that when we started this, we weren't sure about to go forward, how we restarted a grassroots movement. But what we knew was that there was power in numbers, and that we needed to bring other people around us, and other people from different walks of life, different stages or different stratas. We had to ensure that we had people from Prince George, we had people from Seychelles, your worships, but we had people from everywhere in the province, because that's what was going to drive government opinion. That was going to drive public opinion, which drives so often government decisions. And so the power of a group like SOS, you are it. You are it. And if there was one message that I had, beyond thanking you for being here today, is to ask you to go home and do some work. Go home and talk to your friends, your colleagues, about the importance of supporting the work that SOS is doing, because all we're trying to do on your behalf is to raise the level of awareness of these issues, particularly with government, and raise the priority of fixing them, raising that priority up the priority ladder of governments. I think we're having some movement there, but we got to keep it going. And I do know that every time we talk to someone in government and say, we have 130 organizations, those organizations probably represent 250,000 people. That gets people's attention. So we need to keep growing the organization. So thank you to you guys for the wrap-up panel, and thanks very, very much to all of you who've come today. I hope you gained something from it. We will be back in touch with you for sure, and we'll probably ask you to do things. Thank you very, very much.